I'm J. Cole Thomas.
Mario Hudson.
We're here to talk about, from my perspective, spirituality. This is not a debate about who's right or wrong. It's just us presenting our perspectives, talking about our love for Christ.
I agree. I look forward to it.
Mario has been gracious enough over these years to have discussions with me, deepening my understanding of the Bible, making me dig into it to get a better understanding of it. And he comes up with topics that we kind of go over and discuss every week, which I really appreciate. The topic today, which is really one that we've been having, but I thought it would be good to film it.
Right. I agree. I like it.
And this one is, did Jesus really exist?
And the importance of whether he existed or not, because there's some value in the fact that if he existed, there's a value. If he didn't exist, then what's Christianity all about?
Well, again, you know, my perspective of it is, as you say, if he didn't exist, what's Christianity about? It's about the teachings. The teachings exist without the man.
That's true. But, you know, one of the things that we had talked about is that Jesus, as the Word of God, his teaching existed before the man. So, in effect, yes, the evolution or the establishment of Christian teaching is not a concept that started here on earth with Christ the man.
And I would believe that, because again, as what I say is that this is a perfect universe. It's created perfectly. It operates perfectly as we observe it, we look at it.
Right.
And so we can see the perfection of what Christ is speaking about, of balance and harmony within the very universe that we exist in. And of course, that has existed before us.
I agree. And, you know, what you've just said is clearly stated in the Bible. So we can't argue that.
But again,
harmony.
I believe the Bible is a collection of cultural understandings, what people have gleaned from their own spiritualness, right? No one is special. We all are powered by this same spirit, this same love. We can see it raise up grass and trees and everything else around us, power in the sun. Okay. And so in that, as we see lions and tigers and monkeys and elephants live in a harmony, we understand that harmony comes from within them, as nothing outside of them is teaching them how to be animals in whichever species that they just are. And so as we see people culturally over and over and over again expressing something from within them, then yes, I have no issue with saying that the Bible harbors, you know, or harnesses spiritual truth.
Well said. and the point you made, as the point is, we're all created with a being, with a spirit that drives what we should be. As you mentioned, animals, it's who they are. So there's a spirit in us and who we are. The problem, as you just described in a bit, is that as humans we begin to challenge who we are. We begin to create this different reality that we are comfortable with. And in their lives, to me, we're as humans, we deviated from that spirit that's part of us. And again, that's described in the Bible. That describes in principle as we find in the Bible. So before I go on though, you mentioned that the Bible is a collection of human experience or cultural. See, I disagree with that, and I think we've had this discussion because I truly believe that the Bible is indeed inspired by God, and the true essence of the Bible contains those guidelines, and that's where I strongly believe that spirit of who we're supposed to be is the essence of what the story of the principle outlined in the Bible.
I guess that this is where we get back to this topic here, in the sense of did Jesus really exist? Because as I say, that it's come from many cultures, I see that in line with you saying that it's come before Jesus. And so in seeing that, then we should be able to see these types or these concepts within other cultures, and other cultures being able to achieve a harmony, a balance that allows them to exist in the very way that you're saying, a way that we can get to who we actually are and treat each other with love and respect. That's what it takes in order to have civility. That's what it takes for a civilization to exist for a long time. A civilization that doesn't exist for a long time lacks that civility, lacks that harmony, lacks that sense of respect for one another, and thereby they can't grow in population, in people, in understanding.
I agree, and I think as you mentioned, because that principle, that spirit of Christian teaching, the Word, existed prior to what we know today as Christianity. Yes, it's evident that those principles will be demonstrated within the historical, transition of man. So clearly, all other cultures has adopted those principles of Christian beliefs, because as you mentioned, it's not something that's new. It's something that is part of us, something that Jehovah God established in the beginning of the time. He made it part of who we are. So I agree.
Well, so there is my reasoning on why there's no need for a man to have lived, because that perfection, that harmony exists without him.
You know, it's interesting. It's interesting because you're right. The principle, but there's two components to Christ and his presence. One is the presence was a function of correcting a lot of the distortion, and over time, as you mentioned, man, through different phases of his evolution, have changed and distorted and manipulated and adjusted those Christian principles to fit the time, to fit their needs, to fit their method of governing. So all of these changes or modifications or adjustment in the principle that Christ that was established needed to be corrected. And in effect, that was one of the reasons for Christ's presence. One was to correct and adjust the misconception, misunderstanding, distortions that were created over time.
That's why we see geniuses. We see people come along to show us a deeper sense of things. We have an Albert Einstein, Martin Luther King. You know, we have these great men over time throughout history that comes along to help deepen our understanding of where we are. And so I don't doubt in a sense of prophets needing to come along and speak. You know, I myself, in a sense, feel propelled to have to sit up and speak on what I've learned within my own life, in the sense of my own wanting to reject this wholeheartedly, right? The Christianity, Bible, all of it. And today I find a harmony within it. And so even in parts of where I agree with you in people needing again to come along to help correct things for themselves, not God coming along and having to correct his perfection, but say in a sense of the name Jesus is actually Joshua. And so in a sense of Jews not having a successful civilization and needing to correct the fact that they were lost, the fact that they weren't a successful civilization and being wiped out by what was a greater civilization that had conquered them, which was the Romans. And so as you see the New Testament written in Greek and not Hebrew, we see a change within these people that needed to correct their understanding and go back in the same sense of you say to true harmony, to not just these laws and this angry fearful and vengeful God, but the actual harmony of love and peace, of how you can empower yourself with this good news of love. Right? If I can take on a sense of love, then I can put a shield around me. And people who are hateful, negative, so on, they can't get to me. This is something I've experienced within my own life. I've tested for myself to see, again, if I can sit and let go of my ego, let go of my own assumptions, and actually accept who or what is in front of me, then it empowers me to move in a way that I haven't been able to move before. And so that understanding from Christ, from other cultures before it, I believe that the Jews did need to get back.
I would just go to this as we were just talking about civilization and singularity. So the question then becomes, in terms of civilization, and again, I go back to the scriptural principle of creation, and from creation, the evolution of man through all the different cultural stages. So within that respect, I do believe that man have evolved through time and through changes in terms of cultures and civilization.
Are you talking man or ego?
Well, again, in the way we talk, they're the same thing. because man, who he is, becomes his ego. I think I remember you're saying that quite often in that as we speak, as each one of us speak as men, it's our ego that speaks. So the question is, are we allowing our ego, our way of thinking, to drive who we are? Or are we allowing, in a sense, Christ's ego, or that sense of how we're creating, to drive who we are?
Well, let me clean that up a bit.
Okay, good. Okay.
As we speak, I believe that we speak through ego, but what speaks is spirit. And so what powers us is this spirit, but what it filters through is this ego of who we think we are. So there's always a duality for me. There's never, again, where man is just this singular thing. We're always both good and bad.
I won't argue that. I agree.
And so that's where, again, within the Bible, I don't say that it's all bad. I say that it's a mixture of ego and spirit. And without separating out that ego, it gets hard to really discern that spirit.
I love what you just said, because you're in effect describing the story in the Bible, because the story in the Bible is about that discussion of ego and spirit, that battle between who God wants us to be and who we want to be, or more fundamentally, and we talked about that spirit of dependence on God and that spirit of independence from God, as today we call, at least in terms of the Bible term, it's God's guidance and Satan's influence. So God's influence, Satan's influence. And we go through this battle through time, and that's what the Bible talks about. And to your point, as individuals, as we speak, as we start to evolve, or as we speak, and I think one time we talked about this, is that we were created as humans, and as we're born, we're created, and I'll use the term, without ego, or with Christ's ego. Over time, we begin to develop our own ego. So the question then becomes, over time, are we allowing Christ's ego to form that physical manifestation of what we say and do and behave, or are we allowing our own distortion, adjustment, modification of Christ's ego to define that, and then continue to fool ourselves that we are indeed reflecting Christ's ego? And I think in there lies the struggle that a lot of people face. As we always talk, people say, I'm Christ-like, but their actions are quite contrary. I go back to the fact you said, the Jews, at some point in time, we are Christ-like. We are following Jehovah's command, but we're killing and destroying. Well, and we step back to say, some of the actions that the Jews took had God's support. Most of the actions the Jews took didn't, because that's when some of their ego got into place. That's some of their, I remember the one story of Saul where he was given instructions to do something, and he came back and he did something else, and he said, well, look, this is what in my understanding of what God wanted, I brought back all the best animals from these people to sacrifice to God. And when you think about it, to God, they were not good sacrifice. They were not valid sacrifice. But in his mind, because it was good in their mind, it was okay to his God. And in there lies sometimes where we begin to redefine what those principles. Real quick, I was talking to my dad last night, and he told me about a sermon. He goes to the Seventh-day Adventist church. He was telling me about this sermon that this young pastor gave. He was a fourth generation Adventist, and he said something very interesting. He says, today, because of the way young people and others have brought in cultural behavior, attitude, dress into the church, he says he can't even recognize what a Seventh-day Adventist is, because in this plethora of shades and colors and multiplicity that exists in the church, there is no essence. There's no singularity of what that Seventh-day Adventist really represented. So do we say that today in that multiplicity is the truth? Or do we say that that essence, that singularity of what that Adventist principle was, has been distorted and destroyed through the concept of multiplicity?
Again, I compacted down to where, again, I always believe that any spiritual text, anything, is really talking to that reader. And so as a person reads a scripture, or reads the Bible, or whatever, in the sense of what you're saying of how an ego evolves over time. We start off as babies, fresh from Christ, and we love, we accept, and you'll see babies escape some horrific things. We see it in Syria. Babies being pulled out of rubble after being there for 2 days while the adults are dead.
Yeah.
And as babies grow up, they develop an ego. And as we get older and whatnot, we become rigid and stuck within our ego, our sense of thinking that we know it all. Right? And so in that sense of an evolved ego, I agree with. In the sense of an evolving ego of all men, I don't necessarily agree with. We may be saying an evolving ego of a society. A society getting rigid and so on and so forth. As we talk about a singularity, what we begin to see within a society is that they begin to, again, only listen to one way, one voice, one perceived way of moving forward. And as they think that, right, they build only to make everything earthquake proof. Then a flood comes. Right? And so as they seek to make everything flood proof or whatnot, then a tornado comes. And so for me, it's always to see that each person has a purpose. And as we get back into Egyptians' concepts of civility, separate in a sense of an individual's concept of civility. In the Egyptians' concept of civility, the king, the pharaoh, had a duty to his people. If he broke that duty, then it would throw the kingdom into chaos. This is the understanding of the Egyptians. We can see it within the book of the Going Forth by Day. What our European friends tell us is the book of the dead. But again, book of the Going Forth by Day, what they talk about is the very first concept of judgment, right? Of the afterlife, being judged in the afterlife, and so on and so forth. And so in that book, it talks about the king having to go and have 42 confessions to his God to say, these are the things that I did not do as when I lived here. And those 42 confessions are confessions that he has to make of the negative things he did not do.
Okay.
In a sense, as like how the 10 Commandments are written out, and we can see traces of those concepts within the 42. We can see the 10. We know that the Egyptians knew that if it became just about the Pharaoh, then their civilizations would fall. And so as we look at their history, we see a rise, a fall, a rise, a fall, a rise, and then a dissemination.
Okay.
And I say that dissemination because you see Greek, Roman, and these other civilizations that begin to come around, and all the multitudes of civilizations go away. We can see.
Or smaller pockets of civilization gets created.
Well,
Civility doesn't go away.
Not civility doesn't go away, but the individual concepts of civility within the Roman Empire.
Right.
What they did was bring people together and make them all Roman.
Right.
And in that, it historically, they could not say, oh, we're these people, because if they did, what the Jews would, they'd get stomped out.
Right. Right.
And so that's what we see within a historical timeline of civilizations.
Right.
And so I say that to say again that the Egyptians didn't see it in a sense of where they follow Pharaoh as God. That was not their original way. Pharaoh was a function of God to achieve balance or harmony within the universe. Right. And his function again was to give a purpose and whatnot to the people and whatever that served everyone, not just him.
Right. So when the Pharaoh became God is when the problem arrived. Because I think what I've heard you say is as long as the Pharaoh felt that he just was a representative of God,
as a power of God,
then it was fine. But when he took on the attitude that he was God,
all powers,
right? He was God. Then okay, gotcha.
Right, and that's what Akhenaten comes along to say, in a sense that God can only function through me, and the only way through God is through me. This is what Akhenaten comes along to say, and as he shuts down the fact that God comes through us all, you see the collapse, the very fast collapse, something Egypt had never experienced before.
Right.